So if your house looks like this and feels like this in the winter, and those of you that understand ice damming, you'll see the snow dripping off the roof turning into icicles. This is an uninsulated, really beat up house. Homeowners and multifamily building owners also have to understand this type of fourth grade math. Go ahead, Zoe.
So speaking of fourth grade math, here's an important one. You have the choice to make your building more efficient. And you ask two people, and the window person says, you should just replace all your old windows. That way, 15% of your home surface area gets about twice as efficient. And that'll cost you a cool $25,000. But you also ask the insulation person, they recommend that you add insulation to your walls and attic. That means 85% of your surface area will get 4 times as efficient, but it will also cost you $25,000. So I took a while with this one to figure out what's more efficient. And I came to the conclusion that the insulation person is more efficient. Andy, could you confirm or deny?
You win. You are correct.
I love to hear that. Decision seems simple to just fix your windows. I think we've all heard, oh, you have to replace your windows. It's those old or thin or otherwise unglamorous windows that are making your house cold and letting all that cold air in. But you know, you probably have more wall than window in your home. And if we are being told to use windows, we probably just listen to that person. But if you think about it and put a little math into the picture, this actually helps. So it seems simple until we're told to change our building to all electric. And then we're being told that that's less carbon. But when you think about it and you put this math stuff into perspective, is it less carbon? Andy, back to you.
Please go.
So some of us have seen.
We've seen attempts to get us to convert to all electric in the past. This has been something that has been happening for decades, and I'm not exaggerating. For instance, this is a hat that I own that was marketed by the Potomac Electric Power Company, and they wanted people to change from gas stoves to electric stoves so they could sell more electricity. And they sold it under the guise of gas is dangerous. And if you look at the top of the hat, it's very difficult to see, but the printing says, "Kiss an old flame goodbye," which is just wonderful marketing at the hands of the Potomac Electric Power Company. And when I told someone from there I still owned one of these hats, they asked me to please stuff it in a hole and foam it in somebody's house. Please go to the next slide. Many years ago, New Jersey Central Power and Light and New Jersey Power and Light, who are now part of First Energy, gave out these nice yardsticks that fold up real nice. I still have mine. And it says there's no match for flameless electric living. They were trying to get people to convert from gas heat to electric heat, or as the appliance people would say in those days, go gas, go boom. So there was a lot of negative advertising to try to get us into the electrical world.
So where we are in the electrical world, electricity is sold by the kilowatt hour, or kWh, if that's how you like to think. So in simpler terms, if you use 1,000 or a kilo number of watts for an hour, that's a kilowatt hour. Prices for residential electricity, we're going to go over in the next few pages. They are measured in kilowatt hours. Meanwhile, a BTU is the amount of heat it takes to raise 1 pound of water by 1 degree Fahrenheit. There are 3,412 BTUs, which is a British thermal unit, of heat in 1 kilowatt hour. So 1,000 watts for an hour is 3,412 BTUs. There are 100,000 BTUs in a therm of natural gas.
And Zoe, if I can just add in here for a second, we're going to talk about the cost of electricity right now, but the cost of electricity hovers around 20 cents for 3,412 BTUs. And for 100,000 BTUs, you get a therm of natural gas. So it's a much, for $1, you get about 100,000 therms of 100,000 BTUs of natural gas. So gas is significantly cheaper. Please continue.
Thank you, Andy. So we want to talk about what it's costing me, you, and the rest of us. Andy?
So many, many years ago, the chairman of the Atomic Energy Commission told us in 1954, and my friend Les is on the call right now, and he was in the meeting with the Atomic Energy Commission at the time, but electricity was going to be too cheap to meter. And that's because they were telling us that nuclear power was going to take over everything, and it was going to be really great. And this caused many buildings in the late 60s and early 70s to be built all electric. And those buildings are struggling now because their electricity is so expensive in their buildings.
So here are some of the highest costs for electricity in the US. You might see some of our more densely populated states here. We have New York, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, and luckily for us, we have a focus on New York, New Jersey, and Connecticut, which is technically part of the tri-state. You can see we have some of the highest electricity costs in the country. I believe Andy mentioned it was about 20 cents per kilowatt hour. New York, you're looking at 19.3 cents per kilowatt hour.
So I specifically have been buying wind power from upstate New York for the last 30 years and 20 years. And because I buy wind power, it costs me 25 cents a kilowatt hour. But this slide is about the efficiency of electricity from the plant to the plug. And if you start with a natural gas on top plant and go all the way across, you might get 45% efficiency from the plant to the plug. Hydroelectric power is very important. And if you go to straight resistance heating, you don't do that bad. If you look at thermal electric coal, we lose a lot in mining and transport, and a lot in the power plant, and a lot in transmission. It ends up being about 35% efficient. If you look at nuclear plants, which is the fourth one down, you get mining and milling and enrichment and the efficiency of the power plant and transmission, you get 14% efficiency from the plant to the plug. And if you add a heat pump into a coal plant, you end up getting about 70% efficient, assuming the heat pump gets 200% efficiency. But typically in the United States, we don't have heat pumps. So our efficiency from the plant to the plug averages about 35%. You can change that by doing something called combined heat and power. And combined heat and power is on the right, and conventional generation is on the left. But if you look at a boiler that's making hot water and makes steam or heat for you, but you can reuse that heat in a combined heat and power plant, you get significantly more efficient overall. You go from 51% efficiency to 75% efficiency if you use a combined heat and power plant instead of a power plant and a boiler.
So when we're talking about efficiency, what's important to realize is where that energy is being lost. And where that energy is being lost from the plant to the plug, so to speak, is in conversion. This is a little bit of a wormy looking diagram, but it just goes to show that this top area here, this big thick ribbon, is going to be all your conversion losses, which is 60% of the energy that's used in electricity generation. So if we're warming the planet, which we are, you could say 60% of the energy we're using doesn't even need to be being used because it's actually not being used. It's being lost in conversion. So when we talk about where that electricity is coming from, whether it's being lost in conversion or being used, the sources of electricity are, as Andy mentioned, varied from coal, natural gas, nuclear. US carbon emissions are about let me move my little thing here so that I can read the slide. About 32% emissions that are from the electric power sector. So if you can, a third, thank you. Yes, that's correct. A third of all our emissions are from the electric power sector. So if we're talking about electricity as, you know, the great green movement, it's important to remember that actually a third of our carbon problems are coming from the electric power sector. When you look at the electric power sector emissions by source, I'm sure nobody will be surprised to see that it's largely coal, but right up there in a pretty good second place is natural gas. That's 44% of our CO2 emissions by source. And then in that little slab, we have petroleum and other. But as you can see, coal is really the big boogeyman here.
So I really appreciate that every time I bring this stuff up, people tell me that I'm completely making this up. You don't know anything about how much electricity is, but the New York Times did a really, really good series in the magazine about 2 years ago, and they updated it right after the election this year to see how electricity is generated in every state in the Union and in the United States. So this is the United States. And if you start looking from left to right, you see that in 2001, we had lots of coal and lots of nuclear and not so much natural gas. But now, because of the cost of natural gas, we've switched over to natural gas a lot, and 38% of our electricity generated in the United States is natural gas and 23% is coal. Another 19% is nuclear. And I'm just going to stop for a minute and tell all the environmentalists that say to me that nuclear is clean power, they need to understand that a nuclear power plant dumps lots of heat into local rivers and heats up the area like nobody's business. We also have a lot of nuclear waste that will never break down in 100,000 of our lifetimes. And there's nothing that we can do with this nuclear waste. So if somebody tells me that nuclear power is clean, they have to really start reading some things about nuclear power. This is New York State. And New York State, you can see, was nuclear power a lot, 28% in 2001, 27% natural gas, and I'm looking all the way to the left here. And coal is the black thing, and it was pretty big for a while, but the price of coal didn't beat the price of hydroelectric and nuclear and gas. So New York State is nuclear and natural gas and hydro, thanks to all the people in Canada and Niagara Falls for giving us a lot of hydroelectric power. And we'll talk about hydroelectric power in a minute, but the cost of coal and the low cost of natural gas have moved us away from coal in New York State.
So in New Jersey, which is where I am right now, we also have a pretty large proportion of nuclear, but you'll see our natural gas is 55% of how we generate electricity. We don't have any hydro to speak of, nor do we have much coal. Back in 2001, we were 16% coal, but now have luckily dwindled. However, you know, as Andy pointed out, we do have a large share of nuclear, and it's doesn't look like we have any inkling of anything that's truly green anywhere in this forecast, at least from 2019. In Connecticut, they are really excited about nuclear, as are, you know, New Jersey and New York, but 41% of Connecticut's power is produced from nuclear. 52% is from natural gas, but it's worth noting nuclear is so high. And again, we have just some little spaghettis of other sources of energy at the bottom there. Why are people so excited about nuclear? We have a lot of existing nuclear power plants, and it's hard to get them to wind down. I mean, you know, we could ask Homer Simpson, and I'm sure we could ask Andy but we're going to, consider other sources of power in other parts of the country. But it's worth noting that here in this part of the country, we are pretty heavily reliant on nuclear. So going a little further north, Vermont used to be, you can see 76% nuclear. However,
can I add something here? Vermont voted to close their nuclear power plant. It has a lot to do with the fact that Vermont is full of Red Sox fans, and their nuclear power plant was called the Yankee Power Plant. But they closed it down, and that's where that you see that spike that goes straight down.
Thank you. That's a really important piece of context, and also an important piece of information about voting, which is that it makes a difference. We are now in Vermont, not we, the royal we, 51% hydro. And then we have this other truly green energy as well, except that I've had conversations about biomass with other people, but with wind and solar, we really have a huge proportion of green energy here, which is great. Who's not happy about 51% hydro? Well, the people who actually have the tribal lands where the water is coming from, I would say are not that happy about it. There are some First Nations people in Canada who are suing because Hydro-Quebec actually provides a lot of the hydro for the hydroelectric in Vermont. So we here in the United States, as Andy mentioned, import a lot of our hydroelectric power from Canada. And Canada, like the United States, has not stellar track record in terms of taking land from Indigenous people and using it and extracting natural resources. So this is something that is ongoing and is certainly not unique to Hydro-Quebec or hydroelectric power for that matter. But it's something that's important to keep in mind when we're talking about how great it is that Vermont is 51% hydro. It doesn't come at no cost to anybody. And just to get a little bit more factual basis, the Central Maine Power Plant has a plan to build 145 miles of transmission line to connect Hydro-Quebec system to ours in the United States. That includes 64 miles to connect Hydro-Quebec system to Maine. While this line would not directly cross tribal lands, over a third of the dam system is on land that the tribes never actually ceded to Quebec. And if I'm asking if this sounds familiar, it's because you may or may not have heard about some oil pipelines crossing Native American lands in this country. And of course, oil then, as they said it would, spilling into the water. This is a concern that is across North America and of course, other parts of the world. But right here, we can see that it really has an effect on environmental justice concerns. Right here, we're talking about electrification.
So this was a piece that was written by a website called Energy Vanguard, and a guy named Allison does a really good job of doing this. But he actually went to looked at this is Gary Nelson. He's the inventor of the Minneapolis blower door. And he's an environmentalist, and he's an energy efficiency genius. And I've been to his house in Minnesota, in Minneapolis, and it's super efficient. And they lifted it up and they put all kinds of insulation around the foundation. And they have this little tiny heat pump system for the house. And he and his wife are very comfortable in their house. And when I said to Gary, well, you're just burning coal anyway. And he said, no, I buy wind power from northern Minnesota, and I buy wind power from northern New York, but I don't get it. So if you look at what Minnesota gets from their power grid, would you switch to the next slide? This is Minnesota, and they are mostly coal, and they have a lot of nuclear. They have a fair amount of wind, but they have a lot of natural gas. So my argument to my friend Gary was, yes, you've invested in wind power, and that's why 19% of your state is wind power. But you're getting coal, and you're getting nuclear, and you're getting wind, and you're getting natural gas. So if 31 and 18, if 40, 50% of your fuel is carbon and it's 30%, 35% efficient from the plant to the plug, you're wasting a lot of energy and you're burning a lot of coal and a lot of carbon. Similarly, my friend Allison has a house in Georgia, and he made the argument to switch his house over to gas, from gas to all electric. And he made the argument that electricity keeps getting cleaner every year. And so that's why he did it. And again, I respect him unbelievably. He's made his house more efficient. He does fabulous articles about the moisture content of the air conditioning in his house and how to fix it. He's a building scientist of the highest order. But when I saw this article from him and he said electricity keeps getting cleaner every year, I went to Georgia. I didn't go personally to Georgia, but I looked at their fuel mix, and it is a lot of natural gas at the top, a lot of nuclear in the middle, and a lot of coal at the bottom. So there's virtually no alternatives going to his power grid. And so again, this is someone who tells us they're reducing their carbon by going electric, but if the electricity from the plant to the plug is 30% efficient, he would have been better going with a 96% efficient gas furnace and a heat pump for his cooling. So it's not always the best decision. I think this is you.
This is me. Thank you.
Okay.
So when you think about Colorado, beautiful mountains, everybody there, knows about nature and understands climate change and has solar panels. My friend who owns her own house there has her own solar panels and is very excited about them. However, if she looks at this graph, she can see that actually 44% of Colorado is still coal. It's better than 2001 when an apocalyptic 76% was from coal. But here we are still at 44% with a good healthy chunk of 30% natural gas. You may be thinking, well, what about when the president banned coal leasing? So is Kathleen Skama, president of the Western Energy Alliance, from this quote, who says it's been 6 months since the president banned leasing and ordered the review, but the Department of the Interior still has no plan and no lease sales have been held despite a court order. President's order has killed jobs and economic opportunity in the West for no reason, as no progress has been made since then. It's important to note that coal leasing has not made all the progress we would like it to make, or the ban on coal leasing rather. I also think it's important to look at the language she's using here. President's order has killed jobs and economic opportunity in the West. I think it's important to remember that a lot of this country considers itself in the West as a cultural area and as an area where the geographical makeup and the way that people make their living from the land is a really critical part of identity. And if the order to stop coal leasing has killed jobs and opportunity in the West, it feels like something that has been done for no reason to a group of people. Speaking of group of people that are culturally important, West Virginia has 91% coal making their electricity. And I'm sure, except for the vastness of that number, nobody's really surprised because we all know about the coal mines in West Virginia, because that's pretty synonymous with West Virginia. As Angie and I were talking about, there's also very high levels, astronomical, of COVID in West Virginia right now. You could say, are those correlated? Is it causation? I would venture a guess based on, no actual facts that these come from a similar cultural place of independence and autonomy, and not letting the government potentially overregulate you.
So Zoe, what we are saying is our research says that coal equals COVID.
Yes, that is
okay.
The science, and we're putting that forth now for everyone to understand.
Okay. People that don't know that we're joking right now, we're joking, but we wanted to have a little bit of fun here.
This is really mostly a fun presentation. So I also wanted to point out this quote on the bottom about the West Virginia Public Energy Authority. So a little bit of recent news, West Virginia has recently reactivated its Public Energy Authority, which is hailed by a lot of energy market and energy industry people as a great move because it puts the power way back into the hands of coal and oil. That's what the code is at the bottom here when it says, as we research and deploy innovative carbon capture technologies. The research of carbon capture technologies, I would say, is a far cry from actually emitting less carbon. And it shows that we are not on the path to declining our coal as a source of electricity in West Virginia anytime soon, considering that the WVPEA was just reactivated. I'll be honest, I have not read the entire book of Overheated because it's long and it's very well researched and it's a little bit dense for me. However, Kate Aronoff, who wrote this book, she's a journalist, she talks about coal debt. If you're anywhere near my age, you probably have a lot of student debt. And
You're muted.
thank you so much. Thank you. I really appreciate it. Debt relief is something that's been on my mind a lot because it would be great if President Biden could forgive my student debt and relieve me of that. But similarly, you may be asking, isn't there anything that the government could do at a federal level to help handle the amount of coal that is sourcing our electric power grid? And the answer is yes. Congress could help with coal debt. Who has coal debt and what is it? There are an enormous number of people in this country who rely on investor-owned utilities. So there's going to be a slide. I'll just go forward here a little bit. Investor-owned utilities are privately owned for-profit companies that provide your utilities. As opposed to publicly owned, there are an enormous number of those publicly owned utilities that your government runs. However, very few million customers relatively. If there are 1,900 publicly owned utilities and 24 million customers, it's important to note there are only 168 investor-owned utilities, but 110 million customers for them. That means these people have to make a profit, and it's all about the profit when you have investors. That's unfortunately the nature of corporate law and corporations. So if those corporations are in contracts that require them to continue using coal, they're going to be an enormous amount of debt if they don't keep using coal. And in order to relieve them of that coal debt, we would need what Kate Aronoff characterizes as a coal debt jubilee. You don't often hear those words together, but there they are. She also, what she's talking about is coal heavy co-ops, to be specific. So it's not only investor-owned utilities, but also co-ops, which are in rural areas that run utilities for a broader area of rural utilities. Who can forgive the coal debt? Well, it would be the Rural Utilities Service, part of the USDA. If Congress allowed them to forgive the outstanding coal debt of the co-ops, that might be a big step to help rural communities transition to more renewable energy. But again, some co-ops have refinanced with private lenders, as have many millennials who are trying to deal with their debt problem. There's a quote here from a House of Delegates member of Virginia from Overheated that talks about the cultural presence and cultural resonance of IOUs, or investor-owned utilities, in Virginia. She says, investor-owned utilities are a constant presence at every event in the state capitol. It's local politics, it's nonprofits, it's every aspect of civic life. And if it's every aspect of civic life in Virginia, it's hard to imagine that we can get the voters, as we were able to in Vermont, to take action to defund, so to speak, the IOUs. Where would you not want to get coal debt relief? Well, as I mentioned before, the cultural relevance of coal in areas like West Virginia and even Colorado is acute. as we were just talking about in Virginia. And what it stands for in those parts of the country where coal is heaviest relied upon is, as I mentioned, autonomy. And then it's also please forgive my overbroad generalizations. Obviously, not everybody in different parts of the country thinks the same way or has the same political views or loves coal. But talking from a historical perspective, there's a sense of identity in different regions where, the way that we interact with the government and the way that we interact with our own self-sufficiency is a big part of local identity. So this quote from, again, Overheated, not from Overheated, just kidding. It was from S&P Global Market Intelligence talking about coal debt relief. And do you want it? Do you not want it? Well, the guy who runs this co-op says, if you borrow from the government, it comes with strings attached. And that aversion to government support or government relief even is something that we've heard in different places, different parts of politics, coming from people who may be distrustful for different reasons. I also just wanted to say that Loretta Lynn is a coal miner's daughter, and I really like that picture, but also in terms of cultural relevance.
And she's a fine recording artist, and we like her very much.
Yeah, secondarily. It's also worth noting, I actually would like to disclaim any expertise on this subject, but the idea of securitization and putting bonds to relieve coal debt is something that lots of people have been talking about. It's a little bit too technical for me to speak on, but I wanted to throw it out there in case anybody does know a little bit more than I do, because I think that, approaching energy questions from perspectives other than straight environmentalism is something that can be really helpful. So, i.e. financial.
So what about New York City and Westchester? I, again, buy a lot. All the power that I buy is wind power. But this is from Con Ed's website from yesterday. That thing up in the upper left-hand corner says the Con Edison Company of New York. That's what Keokney is. And this is their fuel mix allocation. And I still get 51% natural gas, 37% nuclear, 7% hydro, 1.1% oil, 0.5% coal. So the majority of fuel I'm buying, the majority of electricity that I'm buying comes from carbon-based plants, no matter what I'm buying, no matter what I pay for. And I pay significantly more for my wind power.
So in terms of different ways that different areas allocate their electricity, despite how much Andy might pay for his wind power, which is unfortunate, these have global implications as well. And when we talk about dirty energy and where it is, yes, there are critical discussions about regions of the United States, but there are also regions of the world that have their own priorities. Something Andy and I have talked about a lot is the makeup of the electric power grid in the EU. And about 40% of electricity consumed in the EU comes from power stations that are burning fossil fuels. Everything in the EU is not all so great, so green. About 21% of the final energy that EU consumes is electricity, which comes from different sources. You can see in this graph, the UK is not included, I believe. That'll be addressed in another slide, but otherwise in the EU in 2019, 39% of electricity came from power stations burning fossil fuels. They did have hydropower plants, but only 12% came from hydropower plants, even less from biofuels and solar power, and only 13% from wind turbines. So, it's important to recall that while fossil fuels are going down across this graph, it's not in terms of time, it's in terms of the amount emitted per country. Unfortunately, this graph looks a little bit like fossil fuels are decreasing, but they're actually not. It's just that Sweden uses much less than Cyprus. So what about the UK? The UK has implemented a carbon pricing scheme, which is something of a different conversation from this, but suffice to say, it is one of those financial incentives that different parts of the world and parts of this country, especially California, have talked about implementing to try to curb carbon emissions, or at least put them at a lower level. So in 2010, the UK was getting 108 billion kilowatt hours from coal and 176 billion kilowatt hours from gas. Now they have altered their makeup dramatically. You can see that coal is almost eliminated, and they have gone way up on other sources that are mostly bioenergy. Their wind is significantly up, and their gas is pretty far down. This is due to, as I mentioned, the carbon tax, and then there's also different factors in terms of the UK. For example, there's other market forces that are helping incentivize wind and bioenergy as well. And the UK is committed to shutting down its coal power. So this is something that Andy and I have spoken about a lot as well. The size of the UK helps it do this. It is fantastic, of course, that the UK is really cutting back on their coal power, and as you can see, is almost done using it. But it's relatively speaking, easy to do when you're in the UK, which is 1% of the world's carbon emissions. This is something we would love to do, of course, but we do take up 15% of the world's carbon emissions. And if you look at the UK on a map, it is about the size of Rhode Island, not one of our bigger states. If it were Texas, that would be something different. But in terms of pure size and population size, the US has several times the amount of people in the UK. Several is an understatement, and Europe in general, as well as the rest of the world is 20%. But if you are looking at the US as 15%, Germany is only 2%, Italy, Poland, the UK, these are tiny little emitters, and the measures that we have to take are much bigger than the ones that they have to take. Yes, China is 29%, which is about a third of the world's emissions. The measures that would have to be taken to curb China's emissions are a different presentation because they are a lot. We also want to talk about natural gas bans in new construction in this country. Zooming back into America, this is something that's been coming up a lot, especially locally and at the state level, natural gas bans for new homes and businesses. This is something that would raise prices. As this quote says, regulators can mandate and ban natural gas for new buildings, but without additional policy and rate reform, California's high electrical prices mean electrification mandates will raise costs for households. This is an important point, as Andy was saying, that he pays more for his wind power. Similarly, it's not cheap to force a quick transition to renewable sources of power. Banning natural gas is admirable when you look at it on the surface level, but the amount of money that it will cost regular people who live in homes is significant, and the poorest people can't afford to, be banned from using natural gas in new buildings. As we have, more and more affordable housing that needs to be built, that hopefully will be built, having that affordable housing be totally banned from using natural gas might be a little bit of a problem and a little ironic.
So those of you that are real big solar fans know the name of Dr. Richard Perez. He's from the State University of New York at Albany, or now I guess they call it Albany University. And he's a genius, and he's been a super genius in solar for years. And please look him up. But now his son, Mark, is equally as smart as his father, and I hate to say that. But Mark did this presentation for the International Solar Energy Society, and the link to it is here, and I suggest you take a look at it. because Mark looked at the entire Midwest, and I don't mean just 3 states. He took the middle section of the United States and looked at everything, how to generate a combination of wind and solar. And his thesis is that the south of the Midwest has much, much more sun and can do solar, and the north has much, much more wind. And if they got a good system together to tie those states together and added, I think he said 5% of gas for everything, they could do the entire Midwest with just solar and wind. So, but the amount of investment that needs to be done to do this is huge. And this is the amount of investment that is not being done in the United States. I know that everyone says we're doing more solar, we're doing more wind. It's every graph we showed you tonight, it is an insignificant part of electricity generation in the state, in the region, in the United States.
So what does all of this tell us, Andy?
Someone told me that there's an audio problem. So if you're not talking, can you please mute yourself if you haven't already? What all of this tells us is that I've been hearing from people in the EU for years that they're so superior to us in renewables, and they are not. I want people to stop telling me that switching to electricity will lower our carbon, because it will not. The most important thing for us to be doing is promoting energy efficiency over everything else. And as advocates, I want you to advocate for increased efficiency and increased renewables. And whatever you do, don't call nuclear power clean or renewable or safe. It is none of the above, but you must get more involved and you must get more informed.
So with that, we would like to open it up to discussion, i.e. answering questions that are in the chat or comments. So if you have questions, comments, or concerns, please let us know. And I would like to look at some comments that we already have in the chat. So as Andy just mentioned, Christina Zappo asks, solar power is supposed to be the cheapest electricity since 2018, if I remember correctly, but from the examples you've shown us, it seems we don't use a lot of solar power. Do you want to address that again, or would you like to just?
No one is saying that it isn't inexpensive. It's very inexpensive to generate electricity. We just need the space to do it, and we need the incentives to do it. And if you start looking at maps of the state of New York and you go to things that Richard Perez writes, the amount of space we need in New York State to generate all the electricity in the state for solar is really bad. It's really, really small. So we could do it, we just don't invest enough. One of the participants told me that it's my mic that's screwing up, so I'm going to change mics. Hang on 1 second. So this is apparently the thing that was making all the noise. And hear me?
Try again.
Can you hear me?
Yes, you sound great.
Okay, it was my stupid microphone that was causing the problem. Sorry about that.
I thought you sounded great before, but now you sound
a lot of echo.
Better. Okay. There's also a comment from Jude that says, in terms of coal, COVID, and West Virginia, it's true that air pollution is correlated with COVID rates, or at least that's what I've been reading in reasonable news sources recently. It's always good to hear about reasonable news sources, although as a lawyer, I can tell you reasonable is a word of much discussion in the legal community and a lot of headaches. In terms of air pollution being correlated with COVID rates, I have not necessarily read much about this, but off the top of my head, I would point to something similar to what we were talking about in terms of Hydro-Quebec, which is that people who have the least amount of political capital, at least in this country, are going to be places that have much higher air pollution rates. That's just a fact. Communities of color and poorer communities regularly, reliably have higher air pollution and are more likely to have large emitters placed near them, and are more likely to have less availability of vaccines, less availability of quality care. And of course, you know, if this, I'm not a medical doctor or a scientist, no one's ever said that about me, but I would imagine if air pollution is affecting your lungs or affecting your health previously, that you would maybe be at a disadvantage. But in terms of economic and social factors that are underlying both of those things, that's what I would point to. Andy, we have a couple of comments here. Okay, here is, let me make sure I'm getting things that are the first ones that are first. Okay, Emily wants to know, how can policy and subsidies advance the distribution of energy mix? Richard Mazria from AIA 2030 has indicated that adding solar to every building rooftop in the city would generate enough power for all office and school buildings in the city. I'd assume that's some kind of a community solar effort. Andy, do you have any insight about this?
I don't think that he's correct because we are such a compact city. There is plenty of space to generate electricity in the city, particularly from rooftops and a lot of parking spaces. There's a lot of people that want to support solar on top of things, but we are such a compact city. I'm looking at 1,000-unit buildings where we're doing energy audits right now. And if we put solar on the roofs of all of those buildings, it's barely going to cover the common area lighting in those buildings. So we need significantly more solar generation, and we need solar power plants. I see we have a question before that from Zarama, and I think she says that because solars have a lower capacity factor, it doesn't promote enough electricity. That's exactly it. You know, you can put a coal power plant in a very small space and generate 1,000 megawatts. But to get 1,000 megawatts of solar power, you've got to get a lot of space. So Zarama, you're a very, very smart person, but I've known that for a while.
Andy,
Chris,
why do you think there's so much I don't want to say malevolent disinformation, but why do you think there's so much misinformation and maybe miscommunication around solar?
I think that people are optimists and they think that, you know, a small number of solar panels can do a big job, but they can't. It's very important for our buildings to get more efficient to start with. And then from there, we can go to, we can be using, you know, electricity more. But what we have to do, one of the NYSERDA programs I will say is very intelligent for 1 to 4 family homes, because their first move is electric ready. So the first thing they want to do is make those houses super efficient so they use very little energy. I live in a 100-year-old 5-story brownstone walk-up. It uses very little energy, but we could retrofit it to cut the energy use by another third, and it would be more efficient than 90% of the buildings in New York. People aren't changing to LED lights. They aren't making their boilers more efficient. They aren't doing a lot of things to turn the heat down in buildings. Those people that live in New York City apartment buildings know that they open their windows to control the heat, and the double hung zone valve is a complete waste of energy. So the more we can control the heat in each unit and accept that we can't have 80 degrees in every unit, which a lot of tenants want, we have to start, you know, doing something about that. We have a question from Chris LeBron, and he said the mayor is pushing for 100% electric in homes. The idea is to get rid of gas cooking and 100% electric heating. What is the infrastructure footprint and the cost to the state to make this concept an environmental win? On this and many other issues, the mayor is a blithering idiot, and everyone knows that. He hasn't been schooled in anything he's talking about. If you convert buildings to electrical heat, particularly rental buildings, the tenants can't pay for it because their lease says they are not paying for heat. So now the owner of the building has to pay for electric heat, which is going to be significantly more efficient, significantly more expensive. If the owner is required to convert a steam heated building to heat pumps and the building is 70 apartments, someone has to find a place for 35 or 7 or 50 compressors on the roof. And we don't have the space for that. I talk to people at NYSERDA every day, and I'm dealing with a 200 unit steam heated building. And the first words out of their mouth are, can we convert this building to heat pumps? And I say to them, please come to the building and tell me where we can put the compressors. And it's a big question, and it's not that easy. And so the answer is not to switch people off gas stoves right away, not to switch people over to electric heat, but slowly reduce our dependence on gas, switch over away from well, switch off of oil, and we've been very good about doing that.
Yeah, I mean, I would also argue something that this reminds me of in terms of where the allocation of responsibility is the earlier comment about solar and putting solar on every rooftop. I think it's easy to think about our individual actions as something, or our individual homes as something that will make a large impact, especially psychologically. You know, we need that assurance that something we do is going to make a difference. If you are in your home and it has 100% electric heating, or if you are the mayor and you can be able to say, look at all these homes, they're 100% electric. That definitely seems like an environmental win. I would much rather see that kind of political capital and money capital used for concrete resolutions of large emitters, which have real effects on people who live near those places. I'd also love to see that energy put to things that will make immediate impacts without so much money spent, like reducing people's suffering who live in heat deserts, or reducing the amount of impervious cover that we have in parts of the city, and putting either pervious cover, that's, you know, pervious paving, or putting anything to manage stormwater, you know, or anything to allow more green space, more trees to cool down these heat desert, not heat desert, but these hot spots in the city. People who are of lower income are reliably suffering more from rising temperatures.
Zoe, I was in an 1800 unit apartment complex that cover 4 city blocks the other day. And when the building was built in 1960, they planted a lot of trees. And on a hot day, it was the coolest place to walk in the city because the canopy of trees lowered the temperature so dramatically. And it's a big point. I'd like to comment that Haim or Haim, I don't know how to pronounce your name correctly. I'll say Haim, needs to be a co-presenter tonight because he said the greatest opportunity may be extreme energy efficiency and regulatory reform to allow distributed energy resources to flourish. Community solar, microgrids, I think he meant, and district energy must proliferate. This will serve local resilience, environmental justice, and even support the power grid stability. You couldn't be more right.
Well, that's very helpful. Let me see what else we have here.
Christina yelled at us about being pigs versus China, and you know.
I mean, we emit a lot. I don't think we don't emit a lot. And of course, this is something I was thinking about late in bed last night, because I toss and turn about this kind of thing. And this is something I didn't research because then I went to sleep. But I was thinking about how much we outsource to China, slash outsource to way underpaid laborers there. And I was thinking about, I wonder if any of China's emissions are really our responsibility. And I would actually place a bet on my unresearched thought that they are. How do you recommend that efficiency be achieved? Earl wants to know, would this happen primarily through equipment upgrades and retrofits? More importantly, how would you recommend financing said upgrades?
So Raul, I ask you to walk through any building with me. I do about 100 energy audits a year. They are every multifamily building I go to, except for the 3 I went to last week that were built in the last 5 years, are just hemorrhaging energy at every corner. They don't have efficient lighting. They don't have thermostatic radiator valves. These aren't expensive retrofits, and the easiest way for property owners to finance these upgrades is when they refinance the debt in their buildings. And the average building owner refinances the debt in their buildings about every 7 years. And when they refinance the debt, they take some money out of the building. Thank you very much for taking care of the building. They're supposed to make profit on their building, but then they paint the halls, they put some new lights in, they may point the building to meet local law 11, they'll stop the leaks in the roof, but why aren't they air sealing every part of the building? Why aren't they increasing the insulation in the roof? If they have a ventilation system, why aren't they doing a heat recovery system? It's every possible thing that's imaginable, and owners of over 25,000 square foot buildings have been getting energy audits through local law 87, and they know the steps to take, and they just want a break in the penalties they're going to have to pay through local law 97. I went to a building the day before yesterday that is hemorrhaging energy, and it's a co-op that has been skating along for years. They had no thermostatic radiator valves. They had no device that turned the heat back at night. And this is very common in multifamily buildings. So there's so many upgrades that can be done in every building. And there's so many financial incentives to do this. It's just, it's too hard for an owner to say no, but it all seems new to them.
I mean, I would say, from my perspective, which is not the same as Andy's perspective of knowing what the upgrades are, I think local legislators, at least in New York, have taken steps to, regulate things into existence in terms of energy and climate bills. But I really do think that aggressive, fearless regulation, especially in a place where there is such a Democratic supermajority that there can't really be that much fear of political reprisal as a party. I mean, as a candidate or an office holder, you might lose some political support. But other than that, I think strong and clear regulation, which, as Andy said, there's financial incentive privately in market forces to do these things. But, from my perspective, nothing beats a good old local law or a state law that says this is what we're doing now. So you can get with it or you can not get with it, but really helps incentivize. I'll tell you that.
I think some of the local laws are highly flawed. I have a low income building I'm dealing with right now that has a gigantic laundromat in the ground floor. It's as large as any laundromat I've ever seen in the city. And it's included in their local law 97 total. And so they're going to pay a huge penalty because they are helping the low income people in their building and the surrounding neighborhood for giving them a place to do laundry nearby. And I have talked to people in the city and I have talked to people at Energy Star, and they're like, nope, sorry, they have to eat that. And, that's what's wrong with local law 84, 87, and 97, that they can't understand these things. Emily had a thing about how much energy is wasted on air conditioning. I am in my office right now, Emily, and I can tell you no one's wasting energy on air conditioning in my office. I'm wearing a short sleeve shirt and I'm overheated right now. And I will also say that this year, I decided to not turn my air conditioning on all year in my apartment, and I have not, but I did get a 3,000 CFM ceiling fan, which is an absolutely fabulous piece of equipment, and it completely changed my life. So yes, air conditioning in offices waste a lot of money. Les, I don't know what the VRF workaround is that tenants can be billed for refrigerant flow. Um, I know that some buildings have done a different billing system for the air conditioning and the heat in a heat pump in buildings, so that if you use the building for heat, um, uh, if you use the unit for heat, it gets charged to you. If you use, excuse me, it gets charged to the building. And if you use it for cooling, it gets charged to you. But I don't know enough about that. Heim, it's very easy for you to say a lease modification is necessary. If you talk to anyone at the New York State Division of Housing about lease modifications, it is a complete nightmare. I can't get anyone in HPD to answer my questions about submetering, but there are hundreds of master metered buildings in New York City. And when you try to submeter them, the local politicians come through and say, we don't want to submeter these buildings. It will be unfair to people. But people get a huge rebate for paying for their own electricity, and all they have to do is turn off their air conditioners and turn off their lights and start acting like the rest of us do who pay our bills, and they end up making money in the deal. So lease modifications are really easy to say we're going to do it. There isn't a lease modification available for anything. I don't know who else is here. Identify who benefits from efficiency or reduced electric use. Utility stock shareholders only benefit when that jumped really fast. I'm sorry, Les, I was reading what you were saying. Oh, utility stock shareholders only benefit when the meters are spinning. Actually, as the utility starts using less electricity, they start charging us more for it. So the shareholders end up making more money. If you saw the shareholders over the past bunch of years, um, they the utility companies sold off their power plants because they want to be primarily transmission and distribution companies, and they don't want to run power plants. And they get rate and profit increases based on capital dollars spent. But a lot of the capital dollars spent now for them are on their efficiency programs. So it's not a win-win for them all the time. But utilities have to change. Martha says our building has a scorecard posted in our lobby with a B rating and a numerical score of 76. It's not bad, and you won't pay any penalty. Yes, Raul, you can go out on an energy audit with me. Heim, the programs and incentives are too difficult to access. PACE is not that difficult, but the banks really have to get on board. And having worked in a bank for 10 years, it's very difficult to get loan officers to understand energy efficiency. And it's even harder to get people that appraise buildings to understand energy efficiency. Mbika says, I believe there's a need to take integrated action to control dirty energy. Yes, we are focusing on renewable energy nowadays, but there is a need to reduce energy demand by mitigation also. But we have to reduce energy demand at the buildings. Exactly. Somebody was saying their apartment was really cold today, or their building was really cold today. Slow is right from the point of view of human nature, but there is a world already burning. How do we get to the speed we need to control CO2 emissions if we are moving gradually? Save your energy at home. Be the first one to do it. I have to say the average person in New York City uses 300 kilowatt hours a month. I don't use 100. It's very easy to reduce your use by changing your bulbs, by shutting things off, by looking at your shadow loads or your loads that you don't see. But there's a lot of space to save energy. Anyway, I think we've tired the crowd out.
What?
Oh, Les says the PSC doesn't allow for direct heat billing, but does allow for refrigerant flow billing. Okay. So I don't know how to do that.
Mhm. Well, Les also says, oh, Ambika.
Someone said they would like to join an energy audit with me. My capstone is on passive house, multifamily housing project. Passive house is a wonderful, wonderful system. But I want to remind everybody that in 50 years, 75% of the buildings that are in New York City are the ones that are here today. So we've got to stop talking about converting buildings to passive house because the closeness of our buildings makes it very difficult. And we can reduce the energy use of our buildings by 50% easily by retrofitting them. We don't need to put 2 feet of insulation on the exterior of all the buildings, and we don't have the room. 2 feet is an exaggeration, I'm sorry. But we can't do passive house in a lot of existing buildings, but we can take existing buildings and cut their use by 50%. And we can't convert every building to passive house, particularly buildings that are steam heated. And again, my friends from NYSERDA say to me every week when I tell them I've done an energy audit of a steam building, they say, can we convert the building to heat pumps? And I say to them, can you please come to the building and show me how we can do it? And they never come and they don't know because it's not possible. We have to control the buildings with the systems we have.
Les points out that bottom line is that for elected officials, energy efficiency does not garner votes.
You're absolutely right, Les. And when you are in a group of elected officials and you bring up energy efficiency, the first words out of their mouth are, well, of course we love solar. And this is 40 years when I say to people, when people say to me, what do you do for a living? I say, I make buildings more efficient. And they say, oh, you do solar? And then I bang my head against the wall because people don't understand that making buildings more efficient is taking that building and make it use less. And you're right.
I mean, from a legal point of view, oh man, unfortunately, I don't think I have an answer for this. Zoe, from a legal point of view, do you think IOUs are lobbying to pass anti-solar laws in Albany and throughout the country?
No.
Without knowing any, Andy?
No, it's investor-owned utilities. Solar is such a small piece of their electric use. If you look at solar in the 80s, all of the petroleum companies bought up all the solar companies and then closed them down. The utility companies are investing in solar. They don't hate solar anymore. And I hate to be the one that's supporting and defending investor-owned utilities. But uh, uh, we as a statewide, we have to start generating large solar electric plants, and we're not doing it, and we're not incentivizing it, and we're not telling people how to do it. Community solar is a great idea, but that and you can all look up community solar, and maybe we'll do a session on it. But community solar is absolutely fabulous. But I talked to investors the other day that have a lot of buildings, and in order to get the tax incentives, you need to have a lot of tax debt, and people don't want to have that much tax debt. So there has to be ways to do this better. Heim also asks about best practices with green leases and voluntary agreements. This is very hard in the rental and co-op business to change the way people rent or own their apartments. And our multifamily buildings in the city are a big piece of our carbon problem. And again, the building I went to 2 days ago that was a co-op was a complete mess. And I looked at how much they're going to pay in local law 97 fines, and it's going to be triple their gas bill in 5 years. They're going to pay a penalty that's triple their gas bill. And all that's going to do is put the building under, because they won't be able to afford it. They can afford retrofitting the building right now. They could do it, no problem. But it's getting it through the brains of a co-op, which is, as my old pal Dick Corral used to say, New York City cooperative apartment is a contradiction in terms.
As Chaim and Les have pointed out, I just wanted to touch on a couple of these political / legal items. So yes, Andy, as you said, I don't have that experience being in the room, but no, energy efficiency does not garner votes. What does garner votes, as Chaim pointed out, is that Eric Adams, no matter what anybody thinks of him, apparently likes the green jobs of energy efficiency, ... There's hope. I don't know if there's hope or not, but I'll say that my personal opinion would be energy efficiency is something that would be best pitched tied to something else, something people actually like and care about, which is not energy efficiency. It's kind of like if you're trying to get a child to go to the doctor and then you say you're going to get a lollipop afterwards. It's like, we're going to the lollipop store, but actually it's the doctor. We need to be going to places that are about racial justice and places that are about incentivizing people to get jobs and have housing and, I don't know, transportation. God forbid we had a functioning transportation system. Those are things that people really care about. And then you could just put the energy efficiency in there like medicine in a spoonful of sugar. And, obviously it's not that easy, but I really do feel that combining efforts is something that's overlooked rather. Les says, just imagine if state and local regulatory agencies were in the business of making it easy for alternative energy production instead of being over restrictive. Les, I can imagine it now. I'll tell you, doing environmental law and land use in New Jersey, there's definitely, speaking particularly to solar and not other alternative energy production, but as Andy was saying, what we need is large solar plants. And I know that at least here in New Jersey, there's a lot of local politics that stop people from wanting solar panel farms in their backyard.
You can't put solar on the roofs of some neighborhoods in New Jersey and New York and across the country because the homeowners association says they don't want that look in their neighborhood. So
yes,
there's still that. There are neighborhoods where you can't put a clothesline up to dry your clothes naturally because it doesn't look right for the neighborhood. So let's not get into neighborhoods and homeowners. Zoe, I'd like you to go to the next slide, which is 52. and thank people for attending. We are at 5 minutes to go, and I always like to say to people that we appreciate you coming. We appreciate everybody's questions today. The last thing I got was Con Ed pays pennies for payback of kilowatts versus mass, which pays the market rate. Unless you do community solar and you sell it back to all low income people, then they pay a much higher rate. But yes, but Les, I don't want to compare us to Massachusetts, because tonight we're playing the Red Sox and I want to beat the living crap out of them again and pull farther ahead up on them in the standings, because I don't think that Massachusetts does everything correctly like they say, and I don't think Germany does everything correctly like they say. So I'd like to thank Zoe for helping tonight and being a fabulous co-presenter. And I'd like to thank all of you for hanging out. This was a lot of fun. I thought it would be this much fun. I knew it would be this much fun because Zoe was here. I'll remind you that look at the Green Home NYC website. It's greenhomenyc.org. See the stuff that we have that's coming up. And that's all I can tell you.
Well, thank you so much, Andy. I also want to thank the other volunteers who were very helpful tonight, and everybody who attended, commented, and otherwise participated. So thank you so much, everybody. And I hope that everybody has a great night. And please let us know if you have any questions. You can email forums@greenhomenyc.org. So thank you so much. And I'm going to stop sharing my screen now and end this meeting. Thank you very much, everybody. Have a great night.
Good night.